Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. We are going to do a gigantic, ambitious, fat, massive video over here that Austen is absolutely positively going to hate editing. She may in fact kill me over this. We will just have to wait and see. But what we are going to do today is an ultimate Fantano diss track tier list of all time. Before I get started, let me say, I know that I'm not addressing every diss song ever in this video. That's just not realistic. But what we are going to do here is touch down on 51 of the most important and relevant diss tracks of all time, hitting upon most of the major beefs across the life of hip-hop music. Again, I know it's not every diss, and in order to talk about a lot of these tracks, I'm going to have to gloss over a lot of fine details, a lot of history, a lot of personal vendettas, and really just kind of judge the songs on their own merit in terms of song quality, how scathing the lyrics are, the overall impact of the tracks during the time they were released, what these songs meant in the context of the beefs they existed within. And finally, everything I'm about to say here, just to remind you, is just one single guy in his basement's opinion. That's it. I'm not the be-all, end-all on any of this, and I'm certainly not trying to throw any disrespect anyone's way over these tracks. I'm not involved. Again, this is just my perception of all the songs I'm about to discuss, and that's it. All right, we have to kick this off with a hip-hop outfit that I personally am a big fan of, Boogie Down Productions and KRS-One at large, who were a part of one of the biggest and earliest and most relevant rap beefs ever, the Bridge Wars of the 1980s and 90s, which were pretty much over where exactly hip-hop originated from back in the day in New York. Was it the Bronx? Was it Queensbridge? That's essentially what the back and forth was about. However, like many hip-hop beefs that came after this, a lot of what is being discussed on this track is coming as a result of not quite understanding the original message that this song is reacting to. And that would be MC Shan's The Bridge, which is a really great, in my opinion, old school, hard-hitting hip-hop song that discusses the origins of hip-hop music in general. And of course, the Queensbridge area is referenced in the track. However, there is nothing in the song explicitly that says that it simply originated there, nowhere else, that it was the birthplace of hip-hop, point blank, period, which is why this track, The Bridge Is Over, as well as South Bronx, that also lands on the Criminal Minded album. Both tracks just seem kind of a little pointless in a way, because they're addressing an argument, they're addressing an issue that's not even really an issue to begin with. I mean, I think KRS-One's delivery on the track is great, and I think overall the tone of both of these songs is fine, but overall the focus and the message is not really on point here, and a lot of what's being said on these tracks is pretty much deflated by MC Shan's response on the next track that we are going to talk about here. While generally I hold Boogie Down Productions in pretty high regard, when it comes to these tracks and the beef that came out of them, I'm not so much a fan, which is why I'm pretty much feeling a C tier on these tracks, but specifically The Bridge Is Over. All right, next, as I just said, we have MC Shan over here. Off of Down by Law, and that's the track Kill That Noise. Now, the Bridge Wars didn't end with this track, unfortunately, but the song is still a smart attempt at trying to diffuse the misunderstanding that the original The Bridge track created in the first place, with Shan being pretty explicit in pointing out that's not what I was literally saying on the song, and throwing out other shots at KRS-One for getting up in arms about that track to even begin with. Production and energy on this track, just like the original The Bridge, is absolutely killer. And even though obviously the whole point of the song is to sort of point out the folly of KRS-One's misunderstanding, I could see how some of the lyrics could be misconstrued as an attempt to escalate the entire thing, as Shan is pretty aggressive, especially for the 80s, lyrically on this track in response to KRS-One. Still, I think it's a great track, and I think it, essentially kind of stands as a point of a bigger embarrassment than anything Boogie Down recorded in relation to the Bridge Wars, which is why I'm going to put it in the A tier. Okay, moving on to another artist, another time, really another era. We are going to talk about quickly Dr. Dre with Fuck With Dre Day, which is essentially a song that he dropped on The Chronic, which was pretty much in response to the demise of NWA and mostly took some very specific shots at Eazy-E, especially in the music video attached to the track. The song is catchy, it's hard-hitting, it's anthemic. Snoop Dogg is on it as well, sounding charismatic as hell. While it is not the most biting diss track of all time, what it is catchy, and Dr. Dre certainly used his ear for hooks as well as his knack for production to make a track that wasn't necessarily lyrically scathing, but there were a lot of things about it that made it resonate with people because, again, it was so catchy, it was so fun, it was so bouncy, it was so accessible. So I'm going to put it over here in the A tier. Great track all around. And of course, we could not finish discussing this particular beef between ex-NWA members without mentioning Eazy-E's Real Motherfucking G's, where he puts in his own 2 cents on the whole situation. Who's wrong? Who's right? Who's fake? Who's a poser? Painting his ex-collaborators as clowns, as fakes, is essentially Eazy-E's mission on this track. And, while there is definitely credibility to a lot of the content of what he's saying in regards to his ex-group members, sadly, Eazy-E was not quite the lyricist or the rapper that Ice Cube was. Clearly, he also didn't really have the production powerhouse talent behind him that Dr. Dre did. And as a result, even if he is making some points on this track, sonically, vocally, it's not quite landing. It is falling a little flat on its face, and the overall presentation is sadly kind of awkward. But I mean, that's kind of why in the greater diss track conversation, this song isn't really brought up all that much. I'm kind of feeling a D tier placement on this one, unfortunately. And of course, to top at least this section off over here, we have to discuss Ice Cube's No Vaseline, which sure may not be as slick and as catchy as Fuck With Dre Day, but this song, lyrically speaking and vocally speaking, is absolutely devastating. It is blistering. It is an absolute nuclear style takedown of Dre, of Eazy-E. Really, NWA as a group and their manager, Jerry Heller, is pulled apart on this track, and just Ice Cube is so damn relentless and nasty and vicious throughout the entire song. It's a seriously deadly song, and there was really no diss track on this level before this point in hip-hop history, in my opinion. Like, the nastiness Cube exhibits on this track set a gold standard for nastiness in diss tracks from this point forward. Like, obviously at the time Ice Cube went solo, NWA was probably on its way out the door, but there was no possible way the group was going to stay together and continue functioning after a song this devastating got dropped. Cube pretty much snuffed out any chance that NWA could continue without him with a track like this, which is why it is going in the S tier, unquestionably. Next in the list over here, we also have to go to a devastating, relentless, vicious, classic West Coast diss track, and that is Tupac with Hit 'Em Up, featuring everyone in the Outlaw Immortals. Now, everybody famously knows this track is a big Notorious B.I.G. diss, which is said to have been onset by the release of the Notorious B.I.G. song, Who Shot Ya? Now, here's the thing, though. Like I was saying earlier with, like, the Bridge Wars, it has been said for quite a while that Who Shot Ya? While it was released at a time and in a context where people had to wonder, was Biggie referencing the recent failed shooting attempt against Tupac? Did he have something to do with it, or was he just mocking it? Again, claims have been made that the release of that song and it kind of lining up with that attack against Tupac, it was just coincidence. However, Obviously, Tupac didn't take it that way, as he had quite a while to simmer on it and eventually dropped this track, which again is a very aggressive and unequivocal diss against Biggie Smalls, even featuring a parody Biggie in the music video. And the track tears him down from just about every angle, from his weight to his rap ability, the fact that he's come out with tracks that instrumentally or stylistically were borrowing flows and borrowing instrumental ideas from West Coast hip hop songs. And Tupac's delivery and performance on the track is absolutely insane. You can tell he is just on a warpath and just irrationally pissed off at this guy. I mean, if you listen to this track, it's really no surprise that this song is like really what kind of escalated the tensions between the East Coast and the West Coast at the time, because the track is so damn explicit in terms of who it's focused on. It's so violent. It's so aggressive. How could it not? So in terms of its content and in terms of its impact, it's undeniably a timeless diss. But like looking at the greater context of all of it, you have to kind of worry and wonder, like, could this whole situation have been avoided if in like the year's time between this and Who Shot Ya, you know, could there have been some kind of discussion, some kind of greater understanding forged between Pac and Big? That bit of information is also kind of interesting to think about in the context of more recent beefs that we've seen over the past 10 years that over the internet tend to move a lot faster, response tracks within days. Whereas again, with Hit 'Em Up, Pac had quite a bit of time to stew on what he was doing and saying here post Who Shot Ya. But yeah, it's it's a scathing track, and I cannot deny that. I'm putting it in a S tier for that reason and that reason alone. Okay, obviously, if we're going to talk Biggie and Tupac, we also have to, for at least a little bit, discuss tracks like Long Kiss Goodnight, as well as Kick in the Door to an extent too. Now, these songs land on Biggie's Life After Death, and Long Kiss Goodnight is especially clearly a response to the beef that Biggie and Tupac were having at the time. Now, the very sad irony about the release of these tracks is that obviously Life After Death was released very shortly after the fatal shooting of Biggie Smalls. So at this point on this album, you're getting diss tracks to a man and from a man who at this point have both passed away as a result of this feud. And look, I love Biggie. Generally, I'm more of a Biggie fan than I am a Tupac fan, but considering how subtle the tone is in terms of the focus with the bars on both of these tracks, like, I don't think these are two of Biggie's better songs. And on top of it, it's pretty clear that like Biggie's heart was not as into attacking Tupac as Tupac was into attacking Biggie on Hit 'Em Up. I think that much is kind of clear when you compare these songs. It's actually more Puff Daddy in the background of the song screaming his brains out that sounds more ready for war than Biggie does on the actual song. And again, while these songs are good and Hit 'Em Up is obviously a great and classic hip hop track, would I trade these songs to be able to keep both of these guys alive and active in the hip hop game from this point forward? Abso-frickin-lutely, which is why I'm pretty much feeling a B on these two tracks. So let's move on to the Mobb Deep song Drop a Gem on 'Em, which is off of Hell on Earth. As it should be mentioned that Mobb Deep and specifically Prodigy of Mobb Deep were mocked pretty openly and blatantly toward the very end of Hit 'Em Up 2. It wasn't just simply Biggie being torn apart on the song. And, you know, look, I'll give Mobb Deep this. Their response to the track was much more blatant, much more overt, much clearer in terms of like, okay, we were dissed. This is our response. Here we go. But in terms of instrumental choice, delivery, content of the message, it's just not nearly as memorable or as scathing as Hit 'Em Up. Not to mention, once this whole situation escalated as violently as it did at the time, and Tupac lost his life as a result of it, instantly the public's view of this track kind of shifted. For that and a few other reasons, this song, unfortunately, is really just like kind of a footnote in the midst of the whole Biggie and Tupac beef. Not a super standout or memorable moment, even if the rapping on it and the flows for the most part are very solid. I'm feeling a C on this one. Okay, next we're moving on to another beef that also involves Ice Cube, miraculously, who didn't take too kindly in a few bars to the classic Common song, I Used to Love Her, which, if you're familiar, is a track all about Common's love of hip-hop and what he sort of sees as the progression of it over the years. And I mean, the song is good. I think he speaks a lot of truth on the track, but I could see how Ice Cube would personally take issue with some of the stuff Common has to say on the song around hip hop going more West Coast and going more party centric and appealing more to themes of gangster culture. Now, again, when you actually pay attention clearly to the full context and content of I Used to Love Her, Common isn't saying that's inherently a bad thing. However, still, Ice Cube had some commentary on it, and Common responded once he caught wind of that with an entire song titled The Bitch in You, which there are parts I don't necessarily agree with. I mean, he does sort of say that Ice Cube hasn't had anything hot since his debut album dropped, which is provably not true. But I think he does effectively do a good job of painting a picture of Cube being in his feelings and not necessarily taking the entire track and everything into context when responding quickly and emotionally in the way that he did. In terms of delivery, it's not Common's most solid and consistent performance, but it's still very well written. It's still witty, lyrically, it's biting. Maybe not on the level of a No Vaseline, but you do have to admit it was ballsy on Common's part to actually write a diss track against the guy who wrote that song and Expect to Live Another Day. And in fact, he did, because Common didn't actually get any kind of big response from Ice Cube on this track. They actually ended up settling the beef after this, which is a great thing. So yeah, I am feeling an A tier placement on this track. Okay, moving on to our next beef, different beef entirely. This is the track Second Round KO from lyricist and battle rapper extraordinaire Cannabis, who was slated to appear on an LL Cool J song released and recorded in the 90s titled 4321. And really the origins of this beef were all happening behind the scenes before the track was even released, because LL took issue with a bar that Cannabis put in his verse originally. LL found it offensive that he was mentioning the tattoo on his arm and so on and so forth in a way that seemed kind of cheeky and a little proddy. He sort of pushed him to change the lyrics. LL Cool J also kind of ended up changing the lyrics to his verse to throw a shot back at him. The whole creative fusion of the track falls apart from there, and then Cannabis eventually just comes out with this diss record as a result of this creative partnership on this song with Cool J and him just not coming together. And what's so funny about this track is, again, the origins of it are so weird. The context of it is so weird, and yet there's there was so much attention on this song and so much production value behind it. Like in the track and in the music video, Mike Tyson is everywhere. Wyclef Jean is in the mix too. Like, dude really got a lot of people on his team to just tear apart LL Cool J. And some of the bars and some of the attacks are genuinely funny, but kind of looking back on it, you still have to wonder, why did this happen? This is just so odd that this song came as a result of all this. Just things creatively between these two not gelling and their egos clashing. I mean, I don't think it's one of the greatest diss records of all time, but there are some biting bars on it. Instrumentally, it's solid. Delivery-wise, it's fine too. I'm feeling a B placement on this one, if I'm being honest. Okay, let's move on to the track Lost Ones, which is the first full song off of the legendary record, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, which it's not said explicitly, but if you kind of read into the tea leaves and the narrative around this song, it's pretty clear to see that this track is probably in reference to her ex-collaborator in the Fugees, Wyclef Jean, and Lauryn pretty much goes into a lot of the personal and creative misfires that she had with him or somebody who could potentially fit a similar bill. I feel like this song is pretty essential for setting up the narrative and the need for the Miseducation humiliation of Lauryn Hill, because, you know, it's on this record that Lauryn pretty much illustrates why she would even kind of be going solo in the first place, because of the lies and the deceptions and the betrayals that she describes in this song. The content of which is very scathing. The only thing Lauryn isn't doing on this track, and maybe this is to the song's credit, is just super spelling out explicitly who it's aimed at and who exactly she's going after. But still, beyond that, the writing, the instrumental, the performance overall is great. It's a killer track nonetheless, and I'm feeling an A-tier placement on this one for sure. Okay, moving on to another beef, another era of beef. We're talking about Ja Rule with Loose Change, where he is going at 50 Cent. He is going at Eminem, or as he says on the song, Feminem. And I'm not going to make any ifs, ands, or buts about it. This song is terrible. It's actually pretty awful. I don't even really care about how all of this originated. Ja Rule's performance on this track is annoying. He's clearly emotional. He's clearly very upset for whatever reason. He's just obsessed with just portraying Eminem as gay on the song. That's pretty much all he cares about. There's not really much in terms of bars. The instrumental is terrible. And there's even a really tacky and psychotic bar toward the very end where he goes at Eminem's daughter, which drives Eminem off the brink in his response very understandably. I'm feeling an E placement on this track. It's pretty awful. It's not very good. Okay, so in response to this, Eminem dropped Do Re Mi, or Haley's Revenge, where he does effectively tear Ja Rule apart. Everything from his superiority as a rapper to how insane it was for him to go at his kid in the first place, to the fact that he rips off Tupac and he's derivative and he's boring. He just kind of goes at Ja Rule 3 times harder than Ja Rule did Eminem on his track, despite the fact that Ja Rule, for whatever reason, sounded just even more upset. Plus, after the double combo, Eminem and 50 Cent essentially give to Ja Rule on their response tracks post all of this. His career pretty much did not recover. I'm feeling an A placement on this one. Moving on from here, we are essentially in Eminem mode because we have also Nail in the Coffin and The Sauce, which is a throwback to a similar era where he's dropping a Benzino diss, where he essentially portrays the guy as broke, as irrelevant, as a joke, as a clown. And his career also doesn't really bounce back after the release of this diss. I'm feeling an A placement on this attack as well. We will place it right next to the other Eminem diss. And while we are at it, let's get another Eminem diss out of the way. That is the Eminem and D12 track Quitter, which is pretty much the cherry on top of a multi-track diss beef that Eminem had with House of Pain's Everlast, or, at the time he was a Whitey Ford doing this kind of blues rap rock thing. It all kind of, kicked off with a possible misunderstanding of a bar that Everlast dropped that Eminem took as a diss against him, as well as his daughter. Eminem responded with another track that's not going to be listed here, but one titled I Remember, where Eminem is pretty much mocking his newfound acoustic singer-songwriter style. And that track is genuinely pretty funny as far as, just breaking Everlast balls. He had his own diss against Eminem that I'm not necessarily ranking because it was awful and it was awkward and it was pretty much trash. But this song Quitter over here is excellent in my opinion. And Eminem pretty much shits all over Mr. Whitey Ford and illustrates why exactly his music is so boring and pointless and not necessary. And just like Ja Rule and Benzino that I just mentioned, his career and his whole, white dude doing some bluesy sad song shtick never really quite recovered past this point, and his career was also thrown into the dustbin of history thanks in part to Eminem. It's kind of crazy how Eminem has just proven. And there's another example of this that's going to be later in the video. Eminem has been able to end quite a few careers with diss tracks, or, not like, end people's lives, or, keep them from releasing music at all per se, but like, these people really hit like a low peak of relevancy after he started attacking them on his tracks. Like, it just was really not a recovery. To make a bit of an Eminem reference there. Okay, let's move on to another diss and another beef entirely. That would be the Nas and Jay-Z beef that lasted quite a while, which pretty much kicked off materially with this Stillmatic freestyle. Now, before this point, tensions between Nas and Jay-Z and Mobb Deep were beginning to boil over, and it really became like concrete the moment that Nas dropped this very quick diss track, which is said to essentially be in response to a Memphis Bleak song, who was a Rockefeller artist and a Jay-Z protege at the time. Nas uses this as an opportunity to not just respond to him in this very smart couple of bars where he tears through not only him, but Freeway and other members of, Jay-Z's crew at the time. It's not super deep. It's not super scathing. It's a quick couple of jabs and a good lyrical showing over an Eric B. and Rakim instrumental. And while it's not mind-blowing, it did really kind of like, bubble up over into one of the biggest beefs in hip-hop history, feeling a B placement on this. It's just kind of funny to think of this track in the greater context of beef within rap generally, because there are some parallels between a track like this and a song like That, for example. It's like you get a few bars, you get a few shots thrown out there on a freestyle, on a feature, something like that, and all of a sudden, shit's just popping off. And shit most definitely did pop off with the song The Takeover on Jay-Z's The Blueprint, where Jay-Z is going at Nas, he's going at Mobb Deep, and essentially, rap-wise, establishing himself as the king of New York, with a killer instrumental, with scathing bars, loads of charisma, and a lot of hard truths too. Because at the end of the day, a lot of what Jay-Z was saying on this track was true, because the song ideas and the flows he was bringing to the table, commercially speaking, Mobb Deep and Nas around this time just couldn't really compete. He was representing this new era of hip-hop, whether they wanted him to or not. And a lot of the bars he aims at Nas and Mobb Deep on this track are for sure embarrassing and cutting, which is why it's going into the A tier. Following this, though, as we all know, Nas, of course, had something to say, as he eventually did drop his album Stillmatic, and the opening full track on the record is Ether, his response to Jay-Z's The Takeover. And yeah, it is continually cited as one of the greatest diss tracks of all time for a reason, because he's really tearing Jay-Z apart over biting flows, over his obvious influences, who he's obviously disrespecting. He's kind of going at a legend here, a guy who laid the groundwork for him to succeed in the game like he is today. He illustrates how preposterous that is effectively, as well as Jay-Z's associations with Dame Dash. The track is so vicious, even most Jay-Z fans at the time had to kind of admit that Nas really tore the guy apart, which is why this one has got to go in the S tier for sure. One more track to finish off this Jay-Z and Nas beef is the little freestyle follow-up that Jay-Z dropped in response to Ether, Super Ugly, which I will say, in the greater canon and discussion of the Nas and Jay-Z beef, doesn't get as much credit as I think it deserves. I think Jay-Z does level a very solid response against Nas on this one. He points out some flaws in his character. He illustrates how emotionally hurt he is. He kind of makes fun of just how obsessed he comes across with painting Jay-Z as gay. And he even mocks the chorus of one of the songs on Nas's new record in a way that kind of feels like he's not sweating the whole thing too much. Look, I think it's a really great response. I think it's a very good response from Jay. I mean, I'm not really a debating the fact that it's Nas who essentially kind of came out the people's champ in the midst of this whole beef. But look, I'll say this: I don't think Jay-Z lost this beef by a super wide margin. Like, it was mega, mega, mega close. Moving on to another beef, another era. Let's talk about 50 Cent. Piggy Bank, which is kind of like this multi-diss track where he's mentioning multiple people. He's taking swipes and shots at everybody. Lil Kim, Shine, Fat Joe, Jadakiss, among others. Look, it's not a very focused track. And I mean, considering this guy kind of like came onto the scene with songs like How to Rob, you can't really be surprised that he would come across this confrontational for no damn reason against so many people. I feel like lyrically and instrumentally and chorus wise, the track is just kind of annoying. It's not clever. It's not funny. It's not interesting. And you also have to kind of like wonder what exactly is the point here. Like what is the vendetta in all of this, I guess? I think it's pretty boring. I think it's pretty mediocre. I mean, 50, as I will discuss in a second, does have a very good diss against Ja Rule in the midst of, their whole beef and everything. But, 50 Cent, unfortunately, repeatedly had these moments in his career where he's just like starting beef for no reason with tons of people out of nowhere. And unfortunately, it's this kind of controversy that I feel like he thrived on for a period of time. And once kind of the wave that brought crested, it was pretty apparent that a lot of the stuff that he was dropping was kind of mediocre and not all that interesting, just like this song here. But like I said, from 50 Cent, we also got this track over here, which is his Ja Rule diss off of his big breakout debut album, Get Rich or Die Tryin'. Of course, I am talking about the track Back Down. And I think he does a really good job of tearing Ja Rule a new one on this track. I mean, nothing new or groundbreaking in terms of like, criticisms of the guy or anything like that, but it's a reasonably catchy song, and 50 sounds super locked in terms of, what he has to say about the guy. I think it's a decent and solid diss track all around that obviously Ja Rule didn't really have the capacity to respond to in a way that kind of turned the tide in his favor. So I'll put it in the B tier. It must be said, though, eventually 50's days of just like kind of throwing shots out at everybody did catch up with him. And that came in the form of this Jadakiss track over here, Checkmate, which, is like, kind of one of those random mixtape disses that you would get at the time in the 2000s. And it's an incredible track. I mean, Jadakiss lyrically really took the guy down a few pegs. And, you could tell it's one of those disses where the dude is like really analyzing his opponent and like observing him and gathering the details, gathering the information. The Connecticut bars, obviously, one of the most scathing and memorable off of the track. It's just absolutely a killer diss track all around. And, one that I think doesn't get as much attention as it should. I'm putting it over here in the S tier. Okay, next, I want to move on to a couple of disses at the same time from Cameron, aka Killa Cam. Again, do a bit of a 1-2, do a bit of a double assessment here. One where he's going at 50 Cent on a track titled Curtis, and another one where he is going at Jay-Z on a track titled You Gotta Love It. Now, Cameron, he may not be the most lyrical artist out there, and I say that while appreciating his artistry and his charisma and his place within New York hip-hop. I do love a lot of his early mixtapes, and obviously the first Dipset album is great. So while both of these tracks may not be as scathing or as devastating as an Ether or as a No Vaseline, Cameron does prove himself to be really funny, just gut-bustingly hilarious in the case of both of these disses. And he's just like the master of being able to take this schoolyard teasing you kind of energy and actually make it work on a hip hop song in a way that is just kind of clownish, but in a way that works in his favor. He's clearly not taking the whole thing too seriously, and he's just really like kind of joking irreverently at the expense of both of these guys in a way that I feel like kind of is very funny and kind of lands and just just portrays him in just a very positive and a very strong light. Again, not devastating tracks or anything, but they are very effective and very hilarious and very entertaining takedowns that I would place both very solidly in the B row of this diss tier list. All right, next, of course, with 50 Cent's insults and his braggadocio just flying as boldly as it was, he was getting dissed by a lot of artists. He was getting attacked on all fronts by a lot of people. One of the biggest of which we have to mention is, of course, The Game, who was having an amazing and a massive run on the West Coast at the time, especially with the release of his breakout debut album. The Game dropped this track, 300 bars and running, which in concept, you have to appreciate like the effort that he put into it, because it's just this massive 10-minute diss track where he is just relentlessly going in on 50 Cent and everybody and anything that has anything to do with him. But like, with that being said, like, it does get very tiresome, and after a while, like, the vocal delivery and the constant instrumental switches, the constant beat switches, because there's a lot across the track, do kind of wear on you. And unfortunately, I feel like it kind of makes just the beef not really land. I feel like Game has this tendency that when he is doing a beef song, and we'll kind of talk about this again in a bit, he kind of like expands it a bit too far in terms of like focus and intensity, to the point where it really challenges your will to even invest in what he's saying and what exactly he's trying to get at on these tracks. So unfortunately, while I do admire the effort and it's ambitious to write a diss track against somebody this large, and if anybody was deserving of it at the time, it's 50 Cent, considering again how aggressively he was dissing so many people around the time for seemingly no reason. But still, I kind of feel like this one didn't quite land, even if I think The Game put quite a bit into it, which is why I'm feeling a C placement on it. Okay, next on the list over here, we have to talk about another beef in another region and another era. We are talking about Young Jeezy's beef that went across a few tracks with Gucci Mane. At one time, these two were copacetic, but then they quickly became not that. And you could argue that Jeezy not only went all out, but went a bit too far on this song, attacking Gucci Mane. Because when people talk about this track, and people do talk about it in the history of diss tracks, because it's a pretty essential moment, the discussion never really centers around the rapping or the lyrical content or the instrumental, not only because like a lot of that stuff isn't particularly great, but it's all pretty much overshadowed by this spoken word rant portion at the very end of the song, where Jeezy literally puts a hit out on Gucci Mane's head with a dollar amount attached to it, which is not only unhinged, but it does literally lead to an attempt on Gucci Mane's life. Sonically and lyrically, it's by no means the worst diss track ever, but I mean, there's a lot of reasons that I can't really endorse this track. I'm feeling a D placement on the song. Now, of course, in the midst of this beef, we have to talk about the Gucci Mane truth, which isn't the only response Gucci leveled at Jeezy, but this is the one that must be discussed, because this is the track he released after the attempt on his life. And, honestly, lyrically and performance-wise is pretty incredible. It's one of the biggest FUs in diss track history, because, Gucci Mane is essentially saying, like, I'm still here. I survived. This isn't even a diss track, so he says. It's just the truth. Which, I mean, it is a diss track, but still, he does have a point there. I mean, it's not the most scathing diss song in rap history, it's nowhere on the level of lyricism as any of the tracks in the S tier. But in terms of the content and context of it, there's no responding to a track. You can't respond to this. There's no response. Gucci Mane on this track indisputably has the last laugh and continues to do so as he is continuing to enjoy life today. Feeling an A placement on this one. We're filling up the A. Okay, following that, let's do a quick placement on Eminem's other recent additional diss toward Benzino on the Lyrical Lemonade thing, which does have some biting bars on it, but in terms of like performance and instrumental, it's a little annoying. I'm not really crazy about it. It's just kind of okay, but also unnecessary. Like, why are we even tearing apart Benzino at this point? The stakes are so low. It's so small pickings. We're throwing it in the sea. Benzino's diss toward Eminem Rap Elvis is even worse and even more annoying. Let's throw this in the D. The spitting and lyricism is okay, but overall, again, pointless, annoying, who cares? We also have Freddie Gibbs over here off of the record Pinata, which, if you guys remember, features the song Real, which is a diss also against Young Jeezy or Jeezy, because not just Gucci Mane, but also Freddie Gibbs had dealings with him. They as well had a falling out, and years later, after them pretty much separating off creatively and business-wise, Freddie eventually comes back, pretty much talking about how fake and disingenuous he is as a person on this track Real, which personally I think is one of the better and more solid tracks on the Pinata record. I also want to put it in the A row, but I'm kind of running out of room here. I'm going to throw it over here and make it a little tiny between the MC Shan and the Dr. Dre. Okay, next we have Lil B, the bass god, who is known for at least a few key diss tracks across the length of his career, one of which is this
T-shirts and buttons
song, which is this hilarious and irreverent and silly and very cheeky attack against Joe Budden. I feel like this track honestly marked a new era for diss songs, where it's not super well put together, it's not super well performed, but it's still very funny, it's still very clownish, it's still very silly. In a way, it's kind of like existing in the same vein of those Cameron tracks that I mentioned earlier. It's not the best pen you're ever going to hear, but the character and charisma and the silliness of it and the silliness of the tone of it kind of gets across a lot of the attacks effectively, because you could tell he's not taking the whole situation and himself all that seriously, and he's just kind of like joking on his target, which I think is an effective way of going about a diss track, which is why I'm feeling a nice solid B placement on this one. Another diss, another beef, another target. We also have to talk about Remy Ma with Sheether, which is her diss against Nicki Minaj, where she calls her out on a lot of things. Her fake butt, her alleged ghostwriters. There's a lot of lyrical content on this track that, you know, really rips Nicki Minaj a new one. I can't deny that in terms of like lyricism and in terms of effort, Remy Ma was definitely going for it on this track. But with that being said, there's not much of an impact quotient on this song at all, because when this track dropped, it pretty much just like slid off of Nicki completely. The new era of female hip hop and lyricism that was being ushered in as a result of Nicki Minaj, the writing was on the wall. There was nothing really this track could do to stop it. And after a while, I feel like the song does really kind of drag on, and hearing Remy Ma trying to essentially coattail ride off of the success of Nas's original Ether by kind of trying to murder Nicki Minaj over the same instrumental doesn't quite work, in my opinion. I'm feeling a C placement on this particular diss. And let's not forget that Nicki Minaj had a few beefs going around this time in her career, also with Lil Kim, who tried to also take Nicki down on this Black Friday track. And yeah, personally, while I do think the song has a strong start and Kim is effectively bringing a very old school style of rapping and lyricism, again, at the point this song dropped, there was very little it could do to sort of like take Nicki Minaj down a peg because she's just on a different operating system. She's representing a new wave, a new era, a new generation. And if the Remy Ma song sounded tired, this Lil' Kim one, unfortunately, sounds almost doubly so. I'm feeling a D placement on this one. Now, with all these people going at Nicki Minaj at the time, she did at least entertain Kim with the track Stupid Ho, which as far as diss tracks go, this one's proven to be kind of polarizing over the years. There are some people who see this as one of Nicki's best songs. There are some people who kind of see the whoop, 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 whoop instrumental and, you know, the repetitions of you are Stupid Ho, you are Stupid Ho as just like really obnoxious and annoying and dumb and stupid. Me personally, as the years have kind of passed on with this track, I think it's very funny. I think it's kind of wild. I think it's creative. I think it's eccentric. I think it's proof that Nicki isn't taking the aggression from Kim all that seriously. She's just kind of responding to it with a bit of a hee hee ha ha and being kind of silly and showing that she doesn't need to like, you know, body her on the mic to like prove anything, which in my opinion is probably the best way that she could have responded to the entire thing. I mean, look, there are better diss tracks out there, but as far as, you know, Nicki disses go, this is handily the best one. And I would put this one also in the B section, just throw it right here between the Biggie and the Cannabis. But if we're talking Nicki disses, we also have to talk about her Megan Thee Stallion diss, Bigfoot, which, yeah, is Nicki just getting like really butthurt over that Megan's Law bar that Megan threw out there on a recent track. Yeah, this song is horrible. It's annoying as a diss track, and there's just this crappy ASMR whisper spoken word part toward the end where she like launches a bunch of threats that she didn't even follow up on. This is one of the worst diss tracks of all time, in my opinion. And I feel like Nicki fans would do themselves a favor to just like forget it ever exists. This is going in the F section. This freaking sucks. And speaking of diss tracks that kind of stink, we also have the game also putting in way too much effort into this Eminem diss he did not too long ago, the Black Slim Shady, where, I mean, you know, given the title, you pretty much know everything he's going to say on it, and he does in fact say it. And he just like, once again, just like with the whole 50 Cent and the G-Unit thing, he's like just putting in too much conceptual effort into a series of insults that even if you are kind of like, you know, being in character and kind of building a narrative around it, it's still not going to land. I really had no idea what he was thinking. And clearly like the context of the beef here at the time was just so weird and one-sided, and it was like kind of clear that he was just doing it for album sales. I'm feeling a D on this one. It's ambitious, but it's still not great. And speaking of stinky disses against Eminem, we also have a Kickback, where Melly Mel kind of goes off on Eminem as a result of a spare bar or two that were not too flattering against him. And yeah, this track is absolutely positively weak, embarrassing, and frankly below someone of Melly Mel's legendary status. Even he himself regretted releasing this song after it came out, and the reception, kind of was what it was. This track can also go into the F tier. Continuing on, we also have to do a quick shout out to Lil B's Fuck KD, which is obviously one of the weirder and more unique beefs in this tier list so far, but it's Lil B. You have to kind of, respect it. Because, yeah, he did pretty much out of the blue, after being disrespected by him, go full throttle against basketball player Kevin Durant. And while the track isn't necessarily super listenable, you have to respect the fact that it literally put a curse on Kevin Durant, that it really kind of took a minute for him to shake. I believe at one point Lil B even had to absolve him of the curse and officially end the curse for his sake, which was really nice of him, honestly. In terms of content and performance, again, I don't think it's amazing, but I feel like this is a very unique and a very weird diss track that sits at a very important place in diss track history because of just the very just interesting origins of it. Also a very weird and interesting rap beef, MGK versus Eminem. MGK had his track Rap Devil, which, I think is a pretty solid track from MGK and shows that, he can certainly rap when he wants to. But with that being said, Eminem's age and the fact that he's not as popular as he used to be and so on and so forth, it's not really, anything that hasn't already been said about the guy a million times. And on top of it, going at his daughter, given, patterns of history in the past, is not going to end well for you. And in fact, it really does not, which is what we're going to discuss as soon as I take this track and I put it over in the C tier, because it's okay. It's passable. When I first heard it, before Killshot came out, you were kind of sitting there for a moment thinking like, okay, that's not too bad. Maybe he'll really get away with this, especially considering like what a low point Eminem is at right now in his career creatively. But no, as we are about to discuss, Eminem really does take MGK to school and releases Killshot, which, I mean, in comparison with these other Eminem disses that I've discussed so far, I don't even think it's the best. In fact, it may be one of the weaker ones. Obviously not as bad as like the Benzino one over there in the C tier. Like certainly Eminem's delivery and the relentlessness of his flow is not as great as it is like on the Ja Rule track. He's much more kind of like calculated than he is there, and on the Whitey Ford song too. But like with that being said, it's still funny that post this point, MGK still had to change genres and went from being a rapper to a pop punker, essentially. So once again, Eminem pretty much ends an artist's career or creative trajectory. And what's funny about it is that, at least in my view, he was able to do it with like a B tier diss song. Didn't even take an A or an S tier diss track to pull MGK apart. Eminem really only had to hit him with B level in order for him to completely dominate the guy and, again, make it so embarrassing for him to continue rapping that he had to stop and start making rock tracks. So again, and let me make this clear before I get into like the last 10 tracks of this diss track tier list. While Eminem may not be like the most celebrated diss artist as far as like diss tracks generally go, Eminem has more numbers on the board than any other artist in terms of like, once he touches you with a diss track, like your career just doesn't really recover. Now you could argue Benzino, Ja Rule, Everlast, MGK. He's not exactly going at the titans of the industry or anything like that. Guys who over time probably would have put themselves to bed. Still though, the fact does remain, like once Eminem gets at you, like there's going to be a change there. And speaking of changes, speaking of rifts, we have to also discuss, of course, Pusha T's The Story of Adidon, which, yes, just tons of ink, many pixels have been posted and spilled over this track. Like Ice Cube's No Vaseline, I feel like this song really kind of like defined and started a new era for diss tracks because, and I don't think this really needs to be kind of belabored at this point. Obviously on this song, Drake got massively exposed when Pusha T rapped about a litany of different things, but especially him being a deadbeat dad and hiding his child from the world. It's sort of funny that this track ended up happening in the first place because it's really as a result of Drake responding to Pusha T that this song even happened in the first place. But Pusha T rapping about Drake and people in his orbit like Lil Wayne and like Birdman prior to the release of this song had been going on for multiple years and multiple tracks on Exodus 23:1, specifically also on Infrared, which is the track Drake was responding to that drew The Story of Adidon out of Pusha T. And if Drake and Wayne and Birdman just continued just ignoring Pusha T and acting like he just didn't exist, nothing crazy would have happened and everything would have just continued on as is. But rather than just ignoring him, they engaged, or specifically Drake engaged, and landed in one of the biggest bear traps in hip hop history. Because not only did he just get savagely torn apart with some very unforgiving and cutthroat shots from Pusha T, but again, elements of his personal life, which also include this photo over here, which was very embarrassing for Drake to be posted on the internet in the way that it was. Yeah, Drake really had elements of his personal life thrown out there in a way that at the time he obviously was not ready for. And these days, as more diss tracks come out here and there, there's almost, as a result of this song, an expectation now that diss tracks not only be lyrically scathing, but on some level be some kind of like journalistic expose against the person who you're rapping about, when that wasn't always necessarily the case with many a diss track released before this point in time, as now, because we've gone over dozens of diss tracks up until this point, and that was not always the central focus of many of them. The vast majority of them, in fact. But yes, this song is incredible. It's hard-hitting. It's a game changer. I personally love it myself, and am feeling an S-tier placement on that one. We're kind of getting more contemporary with these diss tracks, so of course many of them are going to focus around Drake because he is one of the biggest rappers of the modern era. We must also discuss Meek Mill's diss track against Drake, Wanna Know, which is his attempt at a response against Drake in the midst of Drake really smothering him with multiple responses. But yeah, if you don't know the full background, which you should, Meek Mill called out Drake for using ghostwriters on Twitter, which kind of just created complete pandemonium on the internet, pretty much put Drake in a position where he had to respond, and he decided to effectively on wax with a couple of cuts, the biggest of which we will be discussing in a second. Meek Mill eventually tried to respond with this Wanna Know song, and it clearly was badly recorded, badly written, rushed, conceptualized under a lot of stress, and despite the fact that Meek Mill seemingly had a lot to say about Drake on Twitter, he didn't really have a lot to say about him that at least landed on wax, which is kind of shocking considering the battle rap background that Meek Mill came from prior to the release of this song, which frankly was hot trash and pretty much left Drake completely unscathed, even if this cover art over here is a little silly. Feeling an E placement on this one, which brings us to Drake's back-to-back, which is the response that he had to Meek Mill, accusing him of using ghostwriters and a host of different things. And even if the ghostwriters were in play on this song, Drake really tore Meek a fucking new one with a lot of clever and hilarious bars that frankly made him look pretty silly and turned him into a massive joke across the internet. One of the most memorable bars on this track is one about how he's asking me about if it's his tour or if it's his girl's tour, meaning the tour he was on with Nicki Minaj at the time. It's really slick, catchy, relentless diss track that goes harder than it feels like it does because it's so groovy, and it's a song that simultaneously could be played in the club. It kind of serves as a reminder that this is a direction Drake could have gone in the midst of his beef with Kendrick, and yet he didn't. And I feel like his tracks and his standing in the beef with Kendrick suffered as a result of it. Rather than focusing on what is clearly Drake's strength, writing tracks that are catchy, that are hooky, that are slick, that stick with you instantly, that have a viral appeal to them, he instead tried to get personal. He instead tried to get dense. He instead tried to do these multi-phase takedowns, in the same way that Kendrick was doing to him, which, I mean, that's obviously a skill that is in his tool set, not as much Drake's. But instead of giving us a nice back-to-back moment that could have potentially outshined Kendrick numbers-wise, Kendrick out-Draked Drake, as we will discuss in a second. But look, at least during this moment with Meek Mill, Drake came out the victor, and it was because he wrote one of the catchiest diss tracks of all time back-to-back. I'm feeling an S-tier placement on this track. We'll put it right next to the story of Adidon. Oh, they're hugging, they're kissing, they're friends. Getting further into Drake's stuff, we also have Duppy Freestyle over here, which is Drake's, initial response to Pusha T, which does, call into question his legitimacy when it comes to pushing drugs and the fakeness of his lifestyle and so on and so forth. But obviously, like, this did not have a great shelf life in the way that, Story of Adidon did. I'll probably throw this one over in the D tier. We have Push-Ups as well from Drake, which is his response to Like That, which, personally, I think is respectable as a track. I think Drake does a pretty good job, even if like the shots against Kendrick and everybody else are a little surface level. He has multiple people to respond to on this track, not just Kendrick, but also Weeknd, Metro Boomin, Rick Ross, whose diss track I'm not even going to talk about in this video because it sucks and it's boring. Plus, a lot of what he tries to get at on that song is illustrated better by Kendrick on the songs I'm about to discuss. But still, again, even if we're not talking about a lot of depth and lyrical wit and substance on this song, it's still catchy. He still effectively fires back at a lot of different people on a single song. And it's really Drake's best showing during this whole back and forth that he had going on with multiple people at the time. It's getting kind of crowded, but I'm going to throw this in the B tier as well. Also, we have to, of course, discuss J. Cole's diss against Kendrick on 7 Minute Drill, which lyrically is trash, instrumentally is trash, and even J. Cole was embarrassed by the song when it came out, and you can see why, because clearly his heart was not in this song, and on top of it, calling T-Pap boring is just like absolutely not true and silly. I feel like he tried to play the same angle that Jay did against Nas and like, oh yeah, you don't come out with that many albums and when you barely have any hits, but like that's just not really true with Kendrick. Yeah, it's going in the E tier because it should have never existed. Next, Drake's final contribution to the recent beef that he had with Kendrick Lamar, The Heart Part 6. Like J. Cole, it was also pretty clear at the very end of this track that his heart was not really in this beef anymore. At this point, Drake's name is being completely dragged through the mud in terms of the people he keeps around him, in terms of being accused of being a PDF file downloader. It's very boring. It's very drab. He just kind of reiterates a bunch of stuff he said about Kendrick on Family Matters, and it's just very underwhelming. I'm putting this also in the E tier. Family Matters was also Drake's other major contribution to the Drake and Kendrick beef, and again, I feel like this is the moment where Drake kind of went wrong. On this track, he tries to out Kendrick by copying from his homework and going through multiple phases and trying to do the whole I'm going to expose a bunch of personal stuff about you thing. And I feel like it starts strong, but it doesn't really end strong musically and flow-wise, even if some of the most scathing accusations on the track land toward the very finish. Also, very bad idea to sort of like divide up his focus across multiple people on this track. Even though it's really Kendrick, he should have been focusing on 110% throughout the entirety of the song. But again, rather than doing something like this, which is not really his strong suit, I feel like Drake should have gone back to basics, back to back basics, and actually try to hit Kendrick Lamar with a song that would have outdid him commercially and would have just proven to be catchier. But we really didn't get that, and unfortunately we just kind of got this very kind of wishy-washy, inconsistent misfire of a song that, again, tried to do what Euphoria did, but didn't quite end up landing. I'm feeling a C-tier placement on this one. We'll throw it over here toward the start. We also have the tailor-made freestyle, which is the one where he tries to, like, AI copy the vocals of Tupac and Snoop Dogg, which conceptually it is like, kind of a god tier psychological warfare chess move, but in terms of execution is just very tacky, is just very annoying, and makes it pretty horrendous and awful to listen to. Also, you know, kind of a bad look in terms of like how it aged, because this was all an attempt on Drake's part to, like, you know, go to response out of Kendrick, and boy, did he get it. We'll throw this down in the F tier. All right, couple more left. We have Euphoria over here, which is Kendrick's massive 6-minute diss against Drake, which I think is really impressive. I think is really well done. This track really got people to start appreciating lyricism a little bit again, because it got so much attention and so many replays, because people were kind of going back over it again and again and again, and reading into the wordplay, reading into the double and triple entendres, really doing their research on the track. I like the multiple phases of the song. It's really like Kendrick brought back Section 80 era Lamar on this record and totally killed it in the process. There are some moments where I feel like dragging it out to the length that Kendrick did does make it a little bit of a tedious listen, or lessens the impact of it a little bit. But you can't deny the fact that like Kendrick had a lot to say about Drake, and he was clearly motivated by a lot of personal hatred and passion on the song for sure. Feeling an A tier placement on this one. Let's move on to Not Like Us, which is Kendrick's final contribution to his beef with Drake, at least as of right now. And yeah, this was pretty much his attempt at out-Draking Drake. In the midst of this beef, Kendrick is the one who ended up nailing down the catchiest of all the songs that were released in the midst of this beef. And he does it with this crazy, danceable West Coast style instrumental with Mustard on the beat. He just outright calls Drake a PDF file downloader multiple times on a crazy chorus. God damn, it's so infectious. God damn, it's so replayable. God damn, it's so freaking viral. It's insane. Like, there really is an argument for this being the catchiest diss song of all time in the history of diss tracks. And Kendrick did really like showcase some real versatility across this beef with Drake. The only downside of this beef ending is that we didn't get as many Kendrick tracks as we could out of the whole thing, because clearly he had a lot of tracks stashed, considering the pace at which he was dropping them. We're throwing this one over in the S tier. And finally, we have Meet the Grams over here as well, which I'm just kind of making very tiny because, you know, the personal effects of the photo. We're going to throw that in the S tier too. I'm just going to quickly say, and I have talked about this at length before, and I feel like I'm going to die if I go any longer doing this video because it's really been a marathon. But I feel like this track conceptually is like one of the most demented and sinister diss songs of all time. Like, you're really writing a detailed, scathing, nightmarish attack against your opponent in a series of letters addressed to their family and their loved ones and those who are closest to them. That is just on another level of sadism and psychosis that I just feel like no other diss track has been on up until this point. I mean, for sure, there are very aggressive and threatening diss tracks out there, but the mental games that Kendrick is playing on this track, especially with it sounding as freaky and as scary at the very end as it does, to me is, again, it's just like, it's another level. It's just another level of insanity. So yeah, Kendrick, in my view, has laid claim to two of the greatest diss tracks of all time pretty handily. And I know there are probably other diss tracks that could be brought up, could be discussed, but I've been going on for quite a long time. We have discussed a lot of diss songs, and I feel like we can kind of leave this here, at least for now. And yeah, that is my diss track tier list. Hooray. Congratulations. Say toast in the comments if you have somehow reached the end of this video. I'm going to go take a nap. You're the best. Over here next to my head is another video you can check out. Hit that upper link to describe. I can't even talk anymore. I'm worn the fuck out. Subscribe to the channel, Anthony Fantano, diss tracks, tier list, forever.